The Chinese youth are doing what even the US cannot do. They've launched a movement that could destroy China's economy.
There is an undercurrent of dissatisfaction brewing among the young in China. A new phenomenon called bailan, meaning let it rot.
It's a rebellion so unique that the CCP can't even suppress this movement like it generally does.
Police flooded the streets to crush a remarkable uprising in major Chinese cities.
In Shanghai, the country's biggest city, police arrested protesters, dragging them away.
In fact, this non-violent movement could turn so deadly for the Chinese economy that the same dictator who used to threaten even the most powerful countries is now literally requesting the youth to end this rebellion.
President Xi Jinping took great pains to send a strong message of empowerment to Chinese youths.
As if that wasn't enough, China is now facing severe consequences for a policy implemented 44 years ago.
The world's most populous country is facing a crisis.
It does not have young people to man its factories or join its army.
But what exactly is this rebellion? Why are Chinese youth so frustrated? And most importantly, how are these problems becoming a nightmare for China? In March of 2022, bailan, a Chinese term, gained immense popularity in China. So much so that in just 6 months, it got more than 91 million views on Chinese app Weibo. I mean, 91 million views in a country like China? You can imagine how serious the issue must have been. Because China generally bans such trends which could pose a threat to the CCP's leadership. Maybe China dismissed it as just another trend and ignored it. But the consequences it started showing later were something no one could have imagined. Now, I have my suspicions that the CCP's bots have always been disliking my China videos in order to suppress it in the algorithm. So, if you guys can just take a quick second of your time and tap that like button below, it helps me out a lot with the YouTube algorithm, especially when covering topics that are exposing the CCP. Thanks so much. The term bailan translates to let it rot. In this movement, young people refuse to put further efforts in life because they don't see any hope in doing so. Many of them have quit their jobs, abandoned their families, stopped working hard, and started accepting being ordinary. In fact, this wasn't the first such trend in China. In 2021, the concept of tangping, which means lying flat, was one of the top 10 internet buzzwords in China. But the question is, how did China end up in this situation? Although the trend emerged in 2022, the roots of this discontent didn't stem from an overnight event. They were the result of a ripple effect from numerous Chinese policies. November 16, 1993, New Oriental Education, a private educational services company, was founded in China. It started seeing massive success, so much so that it even became the largest provider of private educational services in China. It even got listed in the New York Stock Exchange in 2006, and on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange in 2020. The private tutoring sector was getting established in the 1990s, and in the span of a decade, like New Oriental, some of the biggest players were expanding so quickly, they started issuing shares. In fact, before getting listed, New Oriental in 2004 even reported that the size of the educational market in China was approximately 580 billion RMB, or about $72 billion. So the tutoring market was booming, and it provided a huge number of jobs. Estimates even suggest that China's lucrative tutoring industry once employed around 10 million people. But there's a reason I'm using the word once, because what China did to this industry in 2021 shocked the entire world. It erased billions of dollars of wealth from the markets. Listing companies lost 80 to 90% of their value, tens of thousands of them lost their jobs, and it destroyed the entire $100 billion industry. Let's address something that's been on my mind before we move forward. After watching my videos or other YouTubers' videos, I'm sure some of you guys have thought about starting your own channel. One of the biggest hurdles people face when starting a YouTube channel is that they are not comfortable showing their face in videos. Not everyone wants to give up their privacy and be in the public eye all the time. That's one of the big reasons why our videos are made in a documentary style. The craziest part is, people still love the videos. as you can see from the fact that we recently crossed 1 million subscribers. In fact, there are millions of faceless YouTube channels making content and earning ad revenue. In just the last 3 years, YouTube has paid out $70 billion to creators. That's around $60 million every single day. So if you're someone who's interested in starting a YouTube channel, right now is the perfect time. That's why we've launched a completely free 7-day email crash course on how to start and grow a faceless YouTube channel. If that's something you're interested in, you can sign up now for free by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen. All right, now let's get back to the topic at hand.
Tutoring companies can no longer teach compulsory school subjects, teach during school hours, nor earn a profit.
In July of 2021, China banned for-profit tutoring for school curriculum subjects, banned subject-based tutoring institutions from listing on stock markets or raising funds. Although the intention of this move was to lessen the academic burden, this sudden move resulted in a huge job loss. New Oriental education lost 83% of its value in just 10 months. And most of the players in the tutoring sector lost almost 90% of their market value in less than a year. Companies laid off almost 40 to 50% of their staff. If we just consider the top 7 listed companies, 206,000 people lost their jobs. In fact, these are figures of the listed entities. We're not even considering the brick-and-mortar classrooms, these smaller businesses. This wasn't just the tutoring sector. The CCP also cracked down on the real estate and tech sectors since 2021. You could predict the results. In 2022, the e-commerce giant Alibaba ended up laying off more than 10,000 employees, and Country Garden, one of the largest property developers, fired 30,000 employees. Now, just sit back and imagine for a second about the mother who is feeding the family with the income from tutoring, the college graduate who just got a job in one of these companies, the investors who lost their wealth, and the founders who put their blood and sweat and tears into establishing these organizations. Everything was wiped out in no time. Now, if you're a budding entrepreneur, would you feel confident to launch a startup in such an environment? No, right? Because you never know when your years of hard work would get wiped out in just a few months. Similarly, even the employees would feel the same, right? This is just one of the key factors fueling the dissatisfaction among the youth. But this isn't the root cause behind the rebellion. You see, in 1949, the time when China gained independence, it was an extremely poor country. So poor that in 1990 it had a staggering 66.3% poverty rate. Millions died due to starvation. It had a GDP per capita of just $90. But what China did in the next 5 decades was nothing short of a miracle. Fast forward to 2022, China's GDP per capita grew by 141 times to $12,720. Yeah, you heard that right. 141 times. In fact, China became the second largest economy in the world, with a $17.9 trillion GDP. On top of that, the poverty rate decreased from 66.3% in 1990 to just 0.3% in 2018. During the hard times, older generations worked very hard, creating a culture of long working hours in China. This is why even today the Chinese work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. for 6 days a week. This is known as the 996 work culture in China. This translates to 72 hours a week. Just for comparison, the worldwide average working week consists of about 40 hours. In fact, according to China's labor laws, a standard workday is 8 hours long with a maximum of 44 hours a week. But they still work almost 28 hours more than their standards. Part of the reason for this is the tight competition in the Chinese job market, which we'll discuss soon. But this culture is so ingrained that a Chinese employee would almost feel left out if they left before 9 p.m. This is what the younger generations in China are rejecting. The young people have seen other possibilities and they prefer more flexible lifestyles. But what if they don't have an option to do so? Imagine you are working for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. And just like the Chinese people, you are fed up with it, but you still can't quit your job. Imagine your health and your relationships getting messed up simply because you can't give enough time to them. Seems weird, right? But this is the case with so many Chinese youth. Most of them can't quit this toxic culture even if they want to, simply because of one particular reason: the harsh truth that China has hidden from the world.
Youth unemployment hit another record high in May of 20.8%. That's up from 20.4% the prior month.
In August of 2023, the Chinese government released a shocking piece of data, according to which a record 21.3% of Chinese youth were unemployed. Seeing these numbers, the CCP thought that this is horrible and decided to eradicate such horrible numbers. In fact, they did, by suspending the future publication of the urban youth unemployment rate. Yeah, that was the typical Chinese solution for it. This is why most of the Chinese youth had no option but to continue with the 996 work culture, simply because there aren't enough jobs and they don't have any option but to continue with their existing jobs. In fact, the competition is set to worsen, to such an extent that the same Chinese universities which produced 9 million fresh graduates in 2021 are expected to produce 11.8 million graduates in 2024. So the competition is becoming even more fierce. This is the reason why more than 1 in 5 young workers are jobless in China. Now, this is also in part due to the Bailan movement, but also in part due to there not being enough jobs in the market. The situation could worsen to such an extent that, according to an economist at the Peking University, almost half of all Chinese youths may be jobless. Now, this also includes those who are willingly lying flat, but you can imagine how bad the situation could become. The situation is so bad that fresh graduates are taking up weird, and I mean extremely weird, jobs like this.
天呢，我就是陪陪父母啊，完了之后再去买菜，中午做个饭，在下午再去取个快递啊，完了之后打扫他家里，洗洗衣服，完了这也就才做了2-3个月嘛，反正3500左右，差不多。
Yeah, you heard that right. Fresh graduates are becoming full-time children, where they would spend time with their parents, help them with the housework, and in return, they get a salary for it. Hey mom, here's the bill. You owe me at least $500,000? Sorry guys. Anyway, I tried to correlate the relationship between the lack of jobs, the hustle culture, and the Bailan movement. When I studied multiple case studies on this, the plight of the helpless Chinese youth kind of shook me. This is what I found. In an interview with CNBC, 30-year-old Crystal Guo said that she first became the victim of China's crackdown on the private tutoring system. Finally, after 6 months and a lot of struggle, she found another job at a real estate company. Unfortunately, her entire department was laid off in a few months. She tried to find another job, but this was the time when the tech industry was also reporting layoffs. So she finally decided to give up and decided to escape from reality by lying flat. To cover her daily expenses or pursue other hobbies, she used her free time to take up part-time jobs. This is the case with millions of Chinese youth. They are using the Bailan movement as a form of escapism. But there's another and perhaps stronger reason behind this. 成家立业. Every society has some societal expectation, especially from the youth. In China, it is known as 成家立业, which means to establish a family and a career. Now, this also includes buying an apartment. In fact, buying an apartment is linked to their social status in China. So buying property is considered an achievement amongst the youth. But again, the prices of homes have risen so much that buying a home in Shanghai and Beijing has become nearly impossible for the average young Chinese person. The prices are so high that the average housing prices are almost 12 times more than the average income in China. This is the reason why Chinese youths have refused to fall for this societal pressure, simply just because it would be a financial trap for most of them. So all these factors combined have dealt a severe blow to the most important thing: morale. Movements like Tangping and Bailan are not just harming Xi Jinping's Chinese dream ideology, but would also have a large impact on the Chinese economy. Have a look at this. This is China's labor productivity growth. The average for each year comes to almost 7%. But after 2021, it has almost dropped to 4%. I know there are plenty of other major reasons for it, which we will definitely discuss, but the growing discontent, it's definitely played a role in this. Even in these charts, you can see a decrease in China's consumer confidence index and a sharp drop in China's retail sales. This is because unemployment is rising. Chinese youth are jobless, and this is why they are spending less. Since they will spend less, the demand will drop further, companies will produce less, and as a result, either layoffs will take place or a smaller number of jobs will be created. This vicious cycle will continue to affect China unless the CCP takes some solid steps to counter this. Now you might say, so what? It doesn't matter if the domestic consumption is decreasing. China sells to the world, and it will continue this trend to keep growing, right? Actually, I was even thinking the same thing until I found this research paper. In 1995, only 3 Chinese firms made it to the Fortune 500 list. But as of 2023, this number has increased to a mind-boggling 142, which is the highest for any country. Now, although this is impressive, the biggest SOEs or state-owned enterprises in the list, namely 1. State Grid Corporation of China, 2. China National Petroleum Corporation, 3. China Petrochemical Corporation, generated more than 85% of their revenue domestically as of 2018. Almost the same is the case even for private companies. So the majority of the Chinese companies on the Global 500 would be vulnerable to a major slowdown in the domestic economy. In fact, China has even started showing signs of a slowdown, one of which is so surprising that you won't even believe it in the first place.
China's economy is suffering from the opposite, deflation. Consumer prices declined in July for the first time in more than 2 years.
Yes, China is suffering from deflation. Ah, yes, you heard it correctly. You may ask, dude, the world is suffering from inflation. Everything is becoming expensive. In fact, China's consumer prices fell at their fastest pace in 15 years. So if things are getting cheaper in China, then that's a good sign, right? The basic rule of economics is supply and demand. If supply increases without a corresponding increase in demand, prices fall, and vice versa. So the reason there's deflation in China is because the demand has decreased significantly. This is because people and businesses are not spending much in China. The second largest economy is struggling to revive demand. This is coming when no other major economy is witnessing deflation. As we discussed, this would again contribute to the vicious cycle where less demand means less production, and this means less jobs and ultimately dissatisfaction amongst the youth. But amongst all these problems, there is a major problem which is not the economy, employment, or GDP, but something even more important and alarming. In fact, this factor I'm talking about is so crucial that it has broken many countries and is still haunting many countries in the world.
China's leaders are trying to find ways to battle what many economists have described as a demographic, ticking time bomb.
This is none other than the population problem. You see, China has a population of 1.4 billion. Out of these, a whopping 280 million are above the age of 60. So almost 1 in 5 are over the age of 60 in China. In fact, China is now home to the largest population of older people in the world. Unlike China, countries like Japan, South Korea, and Italy, and many other countries are facing this issue. But unlike most countries, where the major reason behind low fertility rates is higher costs to raise kids, in China, it's a completely different case. Youths of other countries did it of their own will. But in China, it was forced by the government with a draconian policy called the one-child policy. China's population grew from 540 million in 1949 to 969 million in 1980. Although the population was growing rapidly, agricultural output in the late 1900s didn't keep up with this pace. This simply meant that food production was insufficient to feed the entire population. To control these exploding numbers and to avoid a hunger rampage across the nation, the one-child policy was implemented in 1980. Although this kept the population in control, the consequences of this policy came to haunt China decades later, when the aging population was growing at an alarming rate and there were not enough young people to replace them. In fact, according to a report, by 2035, an estimated 400 million people in China will be over the age of 60, which will be almost 30% of the population. This is so huge that this would be almost the entire current population of Japan, South Korea, Italy, Canada, and Russia all combined. On top of that, this policy even messed with demographics. A lot of them favored having a boy over a girl, which led to a drastic mismatch in the male-to-female ratio in China. There are almost 35 million more men than women in China, which has created multiple social and cultural issues. This has made the competition for marriage even more intense, much like the job market. So, as the older population increases, the economy will go for a toss. You might think, does that make sense? In fact, that would be great for them because you just mentioned that unemployment is high. So if there would be less youngsters, then even the competition would decrease, right? Actually, no, because the declining population effect can snowball quickly. For example, Japan reported 20,000 fewer people in 2008, and this figure has since swelled to 831,872 people in 2023. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida even called this trend Japan's gravest crisis. A research paper said that when the working age population shrinks, so do revenues of companies and ultimately the economy of the country. This is because a country's workers are its most powerful consumers. Now, I am not just assuming this. We have multiple case studies where a correlation was observed between falling economy and rising older population. Japan is a very classic example of the same. This chart shows the decline of the working age population in Japan. As the country's working age population fell, domestic consumption started declining and the number of Japanese firms on the Fortune 500 list started declining as well. In fact, according to the research paper, the correlation between the decline in the working age population and Japanese firms leaving the Global 500 was 94%. After researching further, I found that from 2000 to 2023, the Japanese firms in the Fortune 500 declined from 107 in the year 2000 to just 41 in 2023. This is almost a 62% decline. In fact, in the 60s and 70s, Japan had an average fertility rate of 2, which has now declined to just 1.3 as of the last decade. And according to experts, a fertility rate of 2.1 children per woman ensures a broadly stable population. This even reflects in the GDP growth of Japan. If we calculate average GDP growth from 2015 to 2023, it comes to just 0.6%. Statista data even predicts that this growth rate will fall to just 0.45% in 2029. Similar is the case for South Korea. The fertility rate is just around 1.1. 10-year GDP growth averages to just around 2.5%. And even in this case, it is predicted to fall to just 2.03% in 2029. In fact, this pattern has been observed for almost every other country with a falling population. Now, you might argue that these countries are growing slow because they have already grown so fast, and that there's almost no room for growth right now. And partly that is true, but still they would have been far better than what they are today in terms of GDP growth if they would have maintained their population. The US is a very classic example for the same. The younger population is important because of two very important reasons. Number one, a declining population means fewer people, which results in less demand for goods and services. This exerts a downward pressure on prices, causing deflation. When this happens, the economic slumps or recessions are more likely. This is what China is facing currently. Declining population affects the supply side of the economy as well as the demand side. So generally, on the supply side, a decline in population results in reduction of labor supply and the production. On the demand side, declining population results in reduction in the demand of consumption goods and services and housing. So the entire domestic market for the goods and services just collapses. And number two, the country is left with fewer workers as more people retire, leading to an imbalance where the government revenues from taxes fall while spending on retired people increases. So, what is China doing to tackle this problem? China realized the magnitude of this problem and it decided to finally end the one-child policy in 2016. Maybe it was too late then, and it had a good reason. Beginning in early 2016, all families were allowed to have 2 children. The fertility rate in 2016 was 1.67, which improved to 1.69 in 2021, but it was still lower than the standard fertility rate of 2.1. This is why the CCP formally passed a law in August of 2021 which allowed married couples to have as many as 3 children. But even after allowing 3 children, the fertility rate reached to just 1.7%. This has the same reasons why even the Koreans and the Japanese aren't having enough children. The Chinese are concerned whether they would really be able to afford more children or not. In fact, decades of messaging and policies promoting the idea of having only 1 child have made many people believe that having just 1 child is actually better. Maybe the situation would have been far better if the CCP wouldn't have implemented this policy, or at least implemented something like a 2-child policy. The 1-child policy not only disrupted China's economy, but also had significant effects on its military.